Cycles within cycles. History does not unfold in linear time, but unwinds cyclically. Cyclical time encapsulates the idea that time is not a linear progress in a one-dimensional direction pointing towards the future. Instead, history should be understood to unfold in cycles within cycles. With each day, small cycles such as the Earth's rotation are completed, whilst larger overarching cycles of great historical eons are still taking their course. The notion of cyclical time, and with it cyclical history, can be found across a wide range of ancient philosophies and archaic religions, whilst linear time is often seen as a modern and progressive concept. However, whilst ancient religions such as Hinduism and Jainism embraced the cyclicality of time, modern philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche have professed very similar ideas. Beginning from a cyclical perspective on time, one must necessarily develop an equally cyclical account of history. In recent time, most famously, Oswald Spengler and Arnold Toynbee represented historians with such an underlying cyclical perspective. What makes both of them so radical is a fundamental break with the linear time of not only progressive ideology, but also within the monotheistic religious outlook on the future. Oswald Spengler says, optimism is cowardice. People who see history as a linear progression from creation towards the end times must feel uncomfortable with the idea that what they consider the end of human history and the fulfillment of our destiny is merely the end of one of many cycles. I would like to go back to the fundamentals of cyclical history, namely the phase transitions of empires and societies as expressed by Plato. Not only does he describe the cycles we can observe throughout history, but he also explains the dynamic principles that cause each phase of the cycle. A dynamics of history. Cliodynamics is a speculative field of history that attempts to model historical developments using dynamical methods from natural science. The underlying assumption is that whilst it is infinitely complex to model individual human behavior with socio-biological models, large overarching trends can be predicted with reasonable accuracy. This approach was inspired by Isaac Asimov's science fiction novel titled Foundation, in which Harry Seldon, a professor for psychohistory, predicts the decline of a galactic empire. Seldon develops a plan to save the empire, but as that plan would take centuries to unfold, he had to plan in advance using his expertise in psychohistory. Interestingly, one of the first actions he takes is to abolish the study of psychohistory itself, as it represents one of the major factors that could distort a prediction by influencing the actual course of history. In Plato's Republic, or Politeia, one finds one of the oldest and most prominent works of political philosophy, and arguably the first work of cliodynamics, or psychohistory. While he focuses on describing what he considers the ideal form of a state, he also gives a detailed account of the various forms of government that can be found and how they transform from one into the other. Plato argues that there is a natural evolution of forms of government and explains the transition between forms in terms of order and disorder. After a brief explanation of thermodynamic principles, I will exemplify how Plato's cycles are specifically thermodynamic in essence. Whilst the narrow form of thermodynamics concerns itself mainly with gases and temperatures, the more fundamental lesson of the laws of thermodynamics are information theoretical in nature. The most famous law of thermodynamics is the second one, as it introduces a mysterious concept into physics, namely entropy. Entropy is often understood as a measure of disorder or lack of arrangement of information. The second law proclaims that the total entropy of a closed system may only remain constant or increase, but can never decrease without external work. Just imagine a collection of particles floating in an empty box. What scenario is more likely? A. All of the balls spontaneously arrange themselves in only one corner of the box, or B. All of the balls are randomly scattered across the box. Whilst we can easily imagine a transition from A to B, our experience tells us that we rarely, if ever, observe the reverse. Let us now assume that power represents a concentration of some vague substance in society in a similar way that particles may be physically concentrated in one area of a box. Plato essentially argues that power dilutes throughout the ages. Beginning from a benign aristocracy or monarchy, the dominant form of government tends to degrade into a timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and lastly, into anarchy. Power concentrated in an elite of noble and sophisticated rulers necessarily excludes larger elements of society, as it is inherently easier to transition into disorder from order, namely increasing entropy. The ranks of the powerful will eventually expand to include those who are wealthy and strive for honor and prestige, often represented by a warrior or guardian caste. This is referred to as a timocracy. Continuing, the purely financial criterion for attaining power allows anyone wealthy and cunning enough to join the ranks of power, further diluting the ruling elite to include people that are primarily interested in increasing their wealth. This is called an oligarchy. Naturally, this relationship between rulers and the ruled builds up resentment among the public, leading to a popular overthrow of government and the establishment of a democracy. Such a distribution of power across society, however, is unstable and eventually breaks down into anarchy, the total dissolution of the social fabric, where slaves and masters cannibalize one another for power. As human societies, such as city-states, do not represent purely closed systems, no state must remain indefinitely in a state of anarchy. Order may reoccur due to external influence or new dynamics emerging from the ashes of the old order. This gives rise to the natural twin brother of anarchy, namely tyranny. Radical order is brought about through the tough and brutal restoration of a power structure. If the tyrant is incapable of re-establishing order, tyranny prevails. However, if he manages to build up a ruling elite around new principles of government, the cycle begins again. The common thread. Technology. Oswald Spengler famously wrote his magnum opus, The Decline of the Occident, on a cyclical view of history. He had, however, missed out in this work on a crucial aspect of history that appears to be linear and not cyclical, namely that of technology. In Man and Technics, he gives a natural account of technology and describes it as the externalization and expansion of the predatory strategy. This expansion appears to be continuing almost linearly, meaning that whilst we may have setbacks in technological advancements when some cycle ends, technology as a whole seems to be advancing linearly towards continuous optimization. Spengler understands technology to be part of the largest overarching supercycle of human history, the cycle of human civilization itself. The acceleration we observe with modern techniques is nothing but an expression of the decline of the Faustian civilization that has rationalized and conquered the globe over the last centuries. Acceleration is that which turns our cycles into spirals. Historical developments recur cyclically, whilst linearly accelerating and expanding, spiraling out into new paradigms of empire. This can be observed when looking at paradigms of sovereignty. De Jouvenel has shown that power has expanded its scope and control across various stages of sovereignty. Most notably, the revolutions of the 17th and 18th century represented transitions from divine royal sovereignty towards popular sovereignty. Regardless of what the regimes within each of these paradigms called themselves, most forms of government within the Platonic cycle can be found in a given paradigm. Most European revolutions, such as the Glorious Revolution in Britain, the French Revolution, or the October Revolution in Russia, can be seen as phases of anarchy after which tyrants re-established order with a central power elite. Cromwell, Robespierre, and Stalin are classic examples of tyrants that set the seed for an upcoming ruling elite. After Robespierre, what better example than Napoleon Bonaparte can be found when looking for someone that brought back monarchy and aristocracy under popular sovereignty? History repeats itself, only that it doesn't. Obviously, on a broad scale, historical events can never be predicted, but at the same time, a form of regularity in history is necessary for us to develop a somewhat coherent self-image of our civilizations. A good way to reconcile a cyclical as well as a linear conception of history is to look at a spiral, a cycle merged with linear acceleration. What are we spiraling out of, or what are we spiraling towards? If you want to learn more about power and its mysterious inner workings, I invite you to join the course on the dynamics of power at Halcyon Guild. Link is in the description.